Hello and welcome to Clinical Changemakers. Today on the show we have Dr. Graham Walker. He's an ER doctor from Kaiser Permanente in Northern California. He's an AI healthcare leader, clinical informatician, director, and entrepreneur of several companies, including OffCall. Dr. Graham Walker, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me. It's great to be here. I know it took me forever to get on the podcast. I'm so sorry, but I'm excited to be here.
No, it's awesome to have you. You're a busy guy. So really excited to talk to you all about AI, in particular generative AI and innovation in healthcare. But I'd really love to start off learning a little bit more about what it means to be co-director of the of advanced development at the Permanente Group in Northern California. I understand that you guys cover like 4.6 million members, so almost the size of New Zealand, and about 10,000 doctors as well. So what does that role look like, and what are the sorts of things that you're doing there?
Yeah, we met with some people from Singapore maybe about 3 weeks ago, and it's a similar vibe of like, oh yeah, we're like Northern California is like the size or the coverage, the number of humans as like about Singapore as well. So yeah, there's Kaiser Permanente. We are the Permanente. We're the medical group, the Permanente Medical Group. We're the original medical group. There are several different medical groups that cover different regions of the United States, and we do Northern California. And so I work with our chief innovation officer and our team to kind of help get not just AI, but technology transformation, new ideas into our organization, into the hands of our physicians with pilots, bringing in, possible networking connections with the technology world here in San Francisco and the Bay Area. And we work closely with our technology group, our research group, so that we're integrated and not just totally off in a corner, which sometimes innovation groups can kind of be, and they can be doing their own thing and the rest of the organization is moving in this direction over that way.
Yeah, I'm glad you sort of brought up a little bit of the structure, because that can be quite a challenge, particularly for large institutions, to be able to move fast, to innovate, to be flexible. And sometimes structures require, separating out a business unit, having separate funding and governance and all sorts of things like that. Could you talk to me a little bit more about how that structure works, and what have you found to be successful, and maybe what things you've learned and maybe moved on from?
Yeah, I think the fact that I have a background in clinical informatics and I have worked with our EPIC steering committee for the past 8-10 years now has made a big difference, because it has allowed me to, again, not just be an isolated unit, but be connected back to informatics, the EHR, the technology group. I think the key takeaway is that our CEO, Dr. Maria Ansari, decided that innovation should be under the same kind of functional group as research, as technology, so that the technology group isn't deploying something that Epic is building, and the innovation group is trying to do the exact same thing. So there's some, there's of course always going to be push and pull and tension there, as everybody has good ideas that are trying to bring things together. But it's a mixture of deciding which direction the medical group wants to go. What are the goals for the year for the medical group? And then how are we going to achieve them? Are we going to do some pilots where we try some AI stuff? Are we going to adopt this new feature from Epic that we think may be helpful? And then work with our IT partners to keep the servers running and keep the computers up as well. That's the third piece I haven't mentioned yet as well.
And what is it about when you're looking at ideas and assessing them and turning them over and bouncing them around? What is it about ideas that you think are ones that have potential? Is it a matter of placing a number of bets and using a bit of intuition? Do you have a framework? What's your approach to those to finding those ideas?
It's a good question. The challenge I've seen, because we get pitched kind of constantly that, oh, we would love to be within the Kaiser ecosystem. Of course, everybody would. The challenge is that we have a we're a value-based care system. We're probably way more like New Zealand or Singapore in the way that we think about investments and think about the direction of healthcare than most of the United States, which is fee-for-service based, right? So my goal is to get the right patient to the right doctor as efficiently as possible, not necessarily to use AI to generate higher billing codes or add more procedures. I want the people who need the procedures to get them as efficiently as possible. But if you don't need the procedure, I don't think we should probably get you the procedure. It's a crazy idea. It might sound especially crazy in New Zealand or a place that has, guarantees health insurance to people, but it's fairly novel in the in the United States. A lot of people I talk to, say, "Oh my God, Graham, I'm so jealous that you get to work in this system." And then when you're working in AI, you get to have that lens, because if I work in a fee-for-service system, I'm not allowed to really think that way, where I'm, solely focused on bringing the AI to the outcome that we're all looking for the patient.
And I understand commercialization is also part of this work here. Could you tell me a bit more about what it means to do that piece?
Yeah, we have a couple products that we are working on that we haven't announced publicly yet, but that we are starting off as internal tools to help support our own physicians and patients, and then our hypothesis is that we can add in a few additional features so that these tools could be used by the outside world and help drive a lot of their efficiencies as well. Even in fee for service, Jono, some of the access challenges that we're seeing in the United States are making it such that even fee-for-service organizations are kind of open to being more efficient. Even though, one could argue in a very pessimistic way that like fee-for-service healthcare wants to not be efficient. Is if I can bring the patient back 10 times, I get to bill them 10 times.
And just going through maybe the talking about an example of something that's gone through that pipeline from maybe you were pitched it or it was an internal idea, then it became a prototype, then it was deployed. I wondered, are there any sort of golden child sort of products or things that you guys have worked on that you've learned a lot from and have been pivotal for patient care improvement?
I will say we've learned a lot, and there's been lots of, failure is probably not the right word. There are a lot of things that we've learned a lot from, and so I guess I don't think of them as failures if we learn something from them. But we're a young innovation group. We really haven't had a chief innovation officer ever, up until 2 years ago, and so there are a lot of pilots and ideas that have made it some of the way, made it partially, but nothing that I can talk about publicly that we have fully deployed. And that's because we have learned, like, oh well, we need alignment from, some of this is obvious, but like we need alignment from all the operational leaders, and we need alignment from IT and alignment from the research team. This is the challenge of working in a health system, is we in a large health system in particular, is when we deploy something, we can deploy it to massive numbers of people and have massive impacts on patients, but we have to make sure we get everybody on the same page. And we've got 23 chiefs of urology at 23 medical centers, so you can imagine people, even all urologists have some difference of opinion about how X condition should be managed.
Yeah, it's I'm smirking because so I'm a GP, and you get 10 GPs in a room and ask them a question, you get 100 different answers. So and then the next day of the week you get another 100. So it can be a real challenge to bring everyone on board, and that scaling phenomenon across healthcare can be a real challenge. And some of those elements are also just how we've been trained a little bit to be sometimes conservative with how we practice, how the status quo is quite ingrained. And so to shift from that, even if it's 2 steps forward and half a step backwards, everybody's going to criticize the half a step backwards. And sometimes they're right to. as well.
Yeah, sure.
So it is a really challenging spot.
Yeah, like even the dynamic of who orders the test that the specialist wants to follow up on, and who follows up on that. Just getting those agreements of like, um, it's the same as like in the ER. Well, who's going to do the central line? Who's going to do the lumbar puncture? Is the ER going to do it? Is the ICU going to do it? Should we agree on a process and a policy that happens so it's standardized every time, or should we agree to not have a process that it should be on a case by case basis? Just those decisions, because I mean that's the thing. We're all busy. It'd be, it's not like anybody's just twiddling their thumb in healthcare just waiting for something to happen. The intensivist is busy, the ER doctor's busy, the resident's busy. We're all busy. So it comes down to, getting those either agreements in place or those relationships to say, oh yeah, hey, I could do it this time. I've got a little extra free time. Or, hey, do you have free time? Because I just got 3 more patients, whatever it is.
And what have you maybe learned or seen in terms of leadership skills or approaches to that relationship building and sort of coalition building space to make large change in an institution? Because we're highlighting a lot of the challenges here, but some successes do get through from time to time.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I think one is that you can never over communicate anything that's important in healthcare. And the reason I think behind this, my theory is that all the people you're trying to communicate with are busy and they're expected to be seeing patients all day long. And so compare that to, like, I don't know, a marketing firm or a technology company where everybody can just say, your manager could say, okay, everybody, we have a half-hour in-service today on using AI, or this new app we're going to need you to use for 2-factor authentication or whatever. You can just pause the workday and decide, yeah, this is worth it. I'm going to have everybody do an in-service on this thing. Well, that doesn't really work as well in healthcare. And we're really, really expensive widget makers to take off the clock. And so there's, of course, going to be a friction where the health system wants their physicians and their nurses and their pharmacists and their social workers to be doing work in the name of patient care as much as possible. I mean, that's literally why we exist. And so that's just a constant tension. And therefore, you cannot over communicate anything, because maybe somebody missed the first email, they missed the second one, but they read the third, or they don't read the emails, but they will listen to somebody at their department meeting that will come talk to them. So I think that's a key thing for clinical operations is over communicating. And even then still, don't get annoyed by the 1 or 2 people that then email you and say, I never heard anything about this, because it's just going to happen. The other leadership skill I'll say is just, I learned this from our CEO, just kind of servant leadership, that, both she is willing to do anything that she would ask of anybody else. And the number one question she always asks me is, hey, how can I help you? What is it that's in your way that, because I'm above you, how can I clear this hurdle from you? Do you need some money? You want to do a giveaway prize to motivate people to try out a new technology? Oh, you have a disagreement with some other med center? Whatever it is, how can I help you? Like, how can I pull you up to the highest level and get you to be the most effective leader you can? And I think that takes some recognition that, like, at leadership, you have some power. You have the ability to influence what the people below you are experiencing. And so I try to do that with the people that I supervise as well. Like, what are the blockers? What are the things that are stopping you from being able to get to the next step in the process?
I can imagine that also requires a culture where leaders are able to spend a little bit of that sort of political social capital, where they can have some discretionary decision making that doesn't have to go to a committee all the time. They can flex and bend to the needs of people, and I guess, as you say, that perpetuates and empowers others to do the same when you model that sort of behavior.
You hit the nail on the head. It's really that discretion, and nobody is everybody understands that, like, you need to see X patients per day, or there's an expectation that everybody's going to be busy, but it's having that wiggle room. It's understanding that we need to bake in whatever 5, 8, 10% flexibility in there, because like healthcare is just not a obvious, predictable field that you can just say, yeah, every day is going to be the same. I mean, that's probably why some of us went into this, especially emergency medicine. No, none of my shifts are ever the same.
Yeah, I was reading a book about health IT, and they kept drawing parallels to manufacturing, and how there is this assumption that if you have more work in progress, more things getting built within the system, then you're most efficient. But actually, then you get really, really constrained and bottlenecked at certain areas, and that there is a degree of capacity that needs to be left on the shelf to flex for changing customer orders and outputs and inputs. And I know doctors, we are extremely allergic to those kinds of analogies, and I am too. But it did ring true around this perception of work in progress being really productive, which actually there can be a big slowdown when you're running at 100% capacity and anything changes, let alone being asked to join a committee.
Sorry to interrupt. It reminds me of queuing theory. Do you know anything about queuing theory? I mean, it's my takeaway from queuing theory is that, once you hit, I think it's like 85 or 90% capacity, the wheels start to fall off the bus, because there's just variance, especially in healthcare. There's just variance in how long it takes to produce a widget, right? So one would imagine that like every UTI is the same. Well, you and I know that's not the case. And so if we say the average UTI takes 10 minutes, some take 30, and they just do. And so if you don't if you're trying to run everything at 100% capacity, you have no ability to handle, changes in either the time it takes to serve one customer, or how complex the customers are, or how many arrive at once. I mean, obviously this applies greatly to the ER, but like it's true in every industry. Whether you're like running a hotel, you probably need to leave like one room open because something may happen to the other room, and you need a one spare in case like the air conditioning doesn't work in one of the rooms, or the plumbing fails. You don't want to leave one of your guests not having a room that they've reserved. So I think that is fundamentally one of the challenges we're seeing, at least in the United States, is we're trying to run our systems at 100% capacity. And that just means, whether it's our humans or our CT scanners, that means we have trouble like putting some of them on into maintenance mode, or getting them maintained and keeping those systems or humans alive and thriving and not burning out. And then there was one other thing I was going to say about, the other thing I love about queuing theory is that if you see a pattern of your failure, that's great, because that means there's actually something upstream you can do. So if you see that every day at right after lunchtime, if it's 1:30 p.m. and there's a like 10 people show up, and every day the system starts to fail around 1:30 p.m., that means that you can look upstream and predictably come up with a solution, which you can't do if you sometimes fail at 4:30 p.m. or 4:30 a.m. and occasionally 1:30. But if it's predictable, that means you actually may be able to fix it ahead of time, which is cool. It's a solution.
And that's a perfect sort of segue into the AI space. I know that you quite helpfully sort of cleave, predictive AI from generative AI. Obviously, big buckets within those areas themselves. But this predictive space, before we go on to generative, I wonder, at Kaiser Permanente and in your clinical experience, have there been some predictive tools that have stood that test of time, and that are actually deployed and being used, and being successful in patient impact?
Yeah, there's a paper from I want to say 2018, maybe 19, in the New England Journal about we call it advanced alert monitoring (AAM). It's with Dr. Gabriel Escobar and Dr. Vinny Liu. Vinny's our chief data officer now, and they essentially took, I think it's like 90 or 100 variables from the electronic health record for all of our inpatients, and this tool is running and it's predicting transfers to the ICU, rapid responses, death, bad outcomes we all want to avoid. And it's running on all of our inpatients and alerting when things seem to be heading south so that we can make an impact earlier. I think it's one of the few models I've seen that is like live in production and working. I mean, much to attribute to them and their work on the model. It's a ton of work to dial up or down the model in terms of sensitivity and specificity. And this, but you could imagine you could make the model perfectly sensitive, but it would just call on every single patient every single day. That's the one way to never miss a patient. And so fine tuning that, and really like working with the operations experts and the leaders to say, what does a good tool look like? What would be acceptable in terms of false positives or false negatives in the system? I think that's its own challenge that never gets talked about. I mean, everybody talks about, oh, you created an AI model, but I actually think the harder part is like, I mean, there's some significant ethical challenges around how do I get that right? I always joke, you could, you could make sure you like miss pretty much zero appendicitis cases if you just CT every single person that walks through the door in the ER. But when you take it to that extreme, everybody understands, well, you would never do that. And then once you point that part out, you're like, okay, well then what is the right answer? Do we do everybody with lower quadrant pain? How do we narrow down the window so that we're trying to get as much signal and as little noise as possible?
Yeah, I'm really glad you emphasized how impressive it is that this is live in the wild and sustained, because I think there are lots of great ideas, pilots, research papers, even that don't necessarily stand the test of time within a clinical institution. And then the second piece is, yeah, I absolutely agree. What are the ethical and value judgments we're making on how those dials are being tuned? And say we're improving, transfer rates by 20% or what have you, and it's down to 10%, right? There's still a gap, but it's better than it was. But what is that 10%? Is it all women? Is it all young people? So that enduring maintenance and enhancement and governance and oversight of a tool as it is ongoing is also pretty important too. It's not just set and forget. You're actually building out a whole piece of, I would say, infrastructure to manage this new risk profiling tool. And so that requires investment, time, energy, all those sorts of things. How have you seen this tool sort of mature? Are you close enough to it to know how those sorts of discussions have played out?
The other publication that I didn't mention goes into the operational usage of the tool. So I think it was maybe in one of the like hospital quality journals, or the our Joint Commission of Hospital journal, and it really didn't go into it went into very little of the tool itself. It went into a lot of the detail about how do you operationalize the tool. Okay, you've got this thing that goes off. Well, what do you do about that? And what we decided to do is have, when the tool fires or flags somebody, the rapid response. Do you guys have rapid response nurses? And yeah, so the rapid response nurse in each hospital, along with one of the hospitalists, will like go to the bedside and check it out. And interestingly, the tool doesn't say why, doesn't tell the doctor why it's flagging. Now, again, that's another ethical thing. Like, uh, do you want to tell them all the reasons. Sometimes that might make sense. Sometimes it might not make any sense. Sometimes it might be, you can imagine it would not be helpful if it said, well, the reason we're flagging it is this guy is 27 years old. He's 5'9". His white count went from 14 to 15. His hemoglobin stayed stable, but his blood pressure times his heart rate divided by 7.3 was greater than 12, right? I'd be like, I have no idea how this is helping me. So in some way, I used to think that was a bug. Oh, this thing isn't explainable. Like, it's not explainable AI. But it actually, in some ways, it actually, I think, maybe forces the human to like dig in and be like, okay, well, what could be going wrong? What maybe is the primary team missing, or what could be secretly happening that has been happening maybe subtly, and so we haven't noticed it. Like, oh yeah, maybe the hemoglobin was 11 when they were admitted, and then over the past 3 days, it has trended down to 9 or 8 or something like that, and it was so subtle or slow that nobody paid attention, and they're having a GI bleed or something, whatever it is. Yeah, no, it's just it's fast, and that's the piece that nobody ever talks about, because it's not, I think, to a lot of kind of academics and knowledge, creating the world's knowledge people, that is not considered valued research, either on the implementation side or just the clinical operations side. The New England Journal has a more of a clinical operations publication called New England Journal Catalyst, and I love it, and I greatly applaud them for publishing this, because it's like, great, you built a tool. If you don't get it in front of people, or you don't get it to a point that it can be used to help human beings, like, what actually is the point of the tool?
Yeah, I think you touched on a couple of really interesting pieces around that explainability piece. That has been something that's been echoing in my mind as one of these fundamentals to how we look at AI. But I'm also challenged by, if I was going into an ER and they wanted to use a tool that was exceptionally good at finding heart attacks, barely missed one. We didn't know why. We didn't know how. What am I going to want for myself or my family or what have you? I can stand on a pedestal and kind of be like, if we can't explain it, then we shouldn't use it. Or are we going to look at the outcomes? And I really wrestle with that, because we do know when we can't explain it and it does go wrong, or something odd is in the weights in the black box and the IP stored in Silicon Valley somewhere. Then what do we do? And that's a real challenge. The other piece I think is really interesting about maybe not sharing all of the data with that clinician and saying, hey, use your clinical approaches to understand this, is that feedback loop opportunity, right? So now you've got X number of clinicians seeing X number of patients based on some sort of weightage. How do we feed that back into the machines? And you can see how these, and that's why I applaud this piece of work, you can see how it just can get bigger and bigger and bigger, because suddenly you have a whole team now recording that feedback, feeding it in, retesting the model. You should maybe fork that model to make sure that you're not changing the weight such that it's now failing, and that snowball cascade really of complexity can really just take off.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I think there have been some systematic reviews looking at explainability in AI, and from like the cognitive science literature, almost. And the conclusion that I've taken away is that if the AI could give an explanation that makes clinical sense to the human, then it actually helps build confidence. And then the opposite, if it comes up with some harebrained thing that would be totally wackadoodle that you could never really parse or understand as a human being, then probably don't share it, because it actually makes the human more confused and less confident in the AI's response, even if the AI is like 99.999% accurate as well. it's it's not an area where I think there's honestly a right answer. There's just a bunch of conundrums and dilemmas on how we handle this going forward. I think the other piece is just the liability piece. That may not be as big of an issue in other countries, but in the United States, I think a lot of physicians feel a tremendous medical legal responsibility or anxiety that, like, okay, well, if I'm wrong and the AI was right, am I responsible? Or if I'm wrong because the AI was wrong, am I still in trouble? And so I think that's another piece that's causing a lot of hesitancy, and I think honestly will probably slow adoption dramatically in the U.S. as well. Is just the like, well, why would I use this thing? I know I can read a CAT scan myself, and I can see if the appendix is inflamed. But I can't do that same thing with this black box model that just says, yeah, this is definitely appendicitis. Go cut this person open. So I think that's going to be a big challenge that if it doesn't get addressed on the regulatory level, probably, then I think it will probably slow adoption of these models.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are just some peculiarities about these models, right? Like we were just talking about if it can explain itself, but it's not explaining itself. It's using statistically the most likely word next in the context of a sentence that is passable and persuadable to a human, which is very different from really touching grass and understanding why a particular output was put through that machine. And then on the um, sort of defensive medicine and how you kind of apply these tools, the challenge with reproducibility, getting these to actually put out the same outputs, and then the models changing as well. It'll be fascinating to know, because there will be a case, and it'll probably be in America, where someone
Yeah.
is taken to court over using one of these tools, and how they actually pin down what the AI was at that moment in time, because they are evolving. The outputs are not, because they're generative. Their outputs are different all the time. It brings me on to some. I think there was another paper from Kaiser Permanente about rolling out AI scribes. I think across the organization. Can you speak to the experience of that?
Yeah. I think we were probably the first large medical system to deploy AI scribes at scale. And again, this is thanks to our CEO, Dr. Maria Ansari, who's a cardiologist, who said, we have to do this. The ability to help our physicians get through their days and get out on time, I think is a critical piece. We were having doctors like go write their notes at home after they put their kids to bed,
Pajama time, right?
for hours. Yeah, pajama time. And I think pajama time still exists as a term nationally, but certainly, there are fewer physicians doing that today than there were, 3 or 4 years ago. And the rollout process again has to, you can't over communicate anything, and I think you really need to give people a good experience the first time, again, because people are so busy. If you could have your entire workforce just not see patients at all for an hour, you could imagine that you could really you could get everybody to adopt an AI scribe, or honestly anything, with a free hour. But because everybody's seeing patients, and margins are quite thin in healthcare, you could imagine if we take away an hour from every single doctor. Well, we have 10,000 doctors. That's 10,000 hours. They maybe see 2 or 3 patients per hour. Like, that drastically gets you behind on our other outcomes and goals that are important, like population health and diabetes control and hypertension. I mean, so our approach was really to first get people that were interested in this technology to be kind of the leaders and let people volunteer to try this out first, and then start to deploy this both at the med center and the specialty level by having embedded kind of technology experts who wanted to both kind of help educate and teach and drive other people onto adoption, because there's nothing that a physician will listen to more than another physician in terms of like trusting their expertise. I don't know if it's because we all did residency, so we just trust each other more, but like if I hear from another doctor that they like this AI scribe program or this whatever, this mechanic or this accountant, I'm probably going to listen to them more because they're another doctor, which doesn't always make sense, but it doesn't make logical sense necessarily, but it definitely is true.
And coming to a rollout, quite so big, and following that through, and actually reaching the goals that I guess you're hoping for, right? Is to reduce burnout and increase satisfaction and allow people to go home on time. What were the outcomes of that rollout?
Yeah, we had really good adoption for a. I would probably say this is the, you know, for us, and probably even for the United States, like this is probably one of the fastest adopted new kind of technologies that healthcare has ever seen. And part of that's from the form factor, the ability that many of these are now embedded into an EHR, but that they don't have to be, but that they're so good that many people will use them because they can be used so easily, right? You just install an app on your phone and hit record. Well, everybody knows how to install an app. Everybody knows how to hit a button on a phone, and from there, kind of the AI does the rest. So I think those were also the other keys to the rapid explosion and the deployment. There's several larger AI scribes in the US, but I wouldn't be surprised if there's not 40 or 50 companies all doing this and finding their own niche. They're either going to, there's ones that are going to work in big health systems. There's others that are going to focus specifically on being really good at primary care or orthopedics or mental health or working for social workers. Like there will be a lot of ones that can find their niche and still be like a profitable, successful business.
Yeah, they've been very popular here in New Zealand and primary care space.
Yeah,
People have been
I know Heidi comes from Australia. Do you guys use Heidi much in New
uh,
Zealand?
yeah,
Yeah.
Heidi, and I think Nabla as well, and
Oh,
I'm
yeah.
sure there's lots of other ones. I guess in terms of understanding those tools, sort of information fidelity from what they record to then what they translate into, I guess there is um, a challenge with that sort of post hoc rationalization that humans are prone to, where we have a conversation with someone, they leave the room, then we look at the list and we go, wow, look at all those great questions and answers I gave. And now I don't actually even need to do the same processing perhaps that I might do when I'm
Yeah.
writing a note, and it sort of gives everything back to me. Cool, I can submit that, and now instead of my note being three or four sentences, which probably was pretty terrible to begin with, now it's 5 or 6 paragraphs. Oh wow! So we improve that experience from the clinician. I can't take anything away from that, but there are some elements in there that perhaps we are, inflating or bloating
Yep.
the information that we're putting into or the data that we're putting into the system. And also there is risks around omission of information that we
Sure.
never see. Or supplementation where the system is assuming I'm talking about horses when I was talking about zebras and vice versa, and we don't have the ability necessarily on a patient to clinician scenario to see those deficits. What's your take in how yes, this is great, it's improving some experience standpoints, but are we getting the value out of it that we should be?
Yeah. I mean, I think from the note bloat perspective, I think all the AI scribe companies are just responding to the regulatory policy requirements of, the US, New Zealand, Australia, whatever it is. And, I've long said that we could probably, get away with much shorter notes if the regulatory or quality metrics permitted that. If we're ultimately, if ultimately the goal of the clinician note is to document what happened, and maybe it's also to communicate to a colleague if they're seeing the patient in follow-up, and maybe it's also to have some record for the patient, as well. um, you could communicate all that information in way less, probably honestly in like 4 or 5 bullet points. Like, especially, maybe John, if you see somebody for follow-up of their high cholesterol, you might be able to do that in like 2 sentences. Oh yeah, hey, they're doing okay. Recheck their lipids, their cholesterol's down. They're going to continue their diet, exercise, and their statin, whatever. Like, what else needs to necessarily be communicated? But at least in the United States, there are quality metrics and billing metrics, and all this other kind of cruft that gets baked in, and medical legal concerns that, like, well, how did you prove that the patient blah 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 unless you documented it? This concept of, like, do you guys have this concept of, if you didn't document it, it didn't happen? Is that a thing in New Zealand? Yeah.
Yeah.
I always feel like it's probably worse in the U.S., but maybe it's bad everywhere. So I think that's part of it, is that these scribe companies are just responding to the expectations of the health system, and the expectations or the needs or the demands of the health system are based on regulatory, billing, quality metric stuff, to have all this extra kind of sometimes junk in there. And then to your other point, I like to move this conversation away from AI or technology or scribes, and I think it's just part of the human condition. Like, when something gets really reliable, we start to do it less. And it's not the AI scribe, it's not AI, it's not technology. That's just like how human beings work. Like, when automated CBC machines started to get really good, we stopped like spinning down blood and looking under a microscope. As technology or anything gets deployed and becomes reliable, humans move on to another task that we find to be more important because we've now relied on it. And so, it is a problem in medicine, and like, uh, you know omissions or hallucinations are certainly not good in your note. But I don't know that we can blame that on AI or the scribe company. I think we just have to blame it on like human evolution. Like, we've been doing that for centuries. Like, once you could like buy jeans, a lot fewer people probably learned how to like sew. And that's just like that's just human nature. We move on to a different task. I don't know how we keep the human engaged necessarily with a tool that's really good but not perfect.
Yeah. I think just pushing on that reliability piece with CPCs and blood machines, I was thinking about that and radiology. These are models abstracting information from the universe to turn it into an artifact that then we can then use in that same universe. And there's sort of data. We lose data when we pull it out, and then we're pushing data back in, and so it's never exactly what
a true
happened.
representation. Yeah.
But in the CBC space, in the blood space, radiology, we have technicians who are checking these systems. We have technology providers who have been doing it for a long time, who create consistency. We have, radiology groups who are looking at the same types of scans. All of this more mature sort of infrastructure surrounding these tools that allow us to be a little bit less engaged with the how they give us the output. And so This new generative AI phenomenon really pushes on that because of how enchanting it is with the fluency of how
Yeah.
it uses language and plays on our senses of what it means to be truthful and honest through its confidence.
Yeah.
Um, and
I
just
wrote about this a little bit on LinkedIn, just this idea that I would not be surprised if in a year, 2, 6 months, that we start to have kind of AI chatbots taking some of the medical history. And the challenge is if the without the doctor, like I'm at home, I have a sore throat, I'm chatting with my chatbot, and then the chatbot sends a summary to you, and then you review the summary, and then you and the patient, hopefully make a decision about, well, should we do some tests, should we try some medicines, whatever it is. um, what do we do with the provenance of, like, is did what the patient say actually make it into the summary? How much are you responsible as the physician for confirming the stuff that the AI summary of the patient got to you? Like, do you need to ask me a second time? Wait, so this says that you didn't have a fever. You're sure you don't have a fever? Um, Patients will probably find that annoying, but if you're ultimately responsible for your medical decision making, what do we do when, like, the two sides that have always been together, always talking to each other, when those get split as well?
and and we're going to brush up against the traditional bottlenecks that have always existed around decision making. Am I going to operate on this person? Am I going to prescribe a medication? And you can see, depending on what AI you're using, they do struggle to um, perfectly hedge when you give them information. It's kind of like, well, you banged your knee and you got a scratch, could be septic arthritis. You
Yeah.
probably need an MRI and a
Yep.
needle and a da 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 da. And so, um, you know, how those tools get regulated, and it comes back to that sensitivity specificity dial, how those tools are wanting to be dialed in, and then how that can that judgment maker, clinician, nurse, whoever else, is then interpreting that information is going to be a real challenge. I guess, from a patient's perspective, access to healthcare is really, really hard.
Yeah.
And the vast majority of patients, before they see a doctor, have asked a family member, have gone online, have tried something at home. And so if we're able to lift some of those boats up, then that's a huge win. And perhaps if dialed in correctly, those people can do a lot of the things that keep them well at home and in their communities before they end up in the ER.
Yeah.
But that requires quite a lot of alignment of incentives, and human nature can be a lot more complex than what I'm describing.
Well, John, I think that the key, you said it perfectly. The key is judgment. I think judgment, I've been honing in on that word more frequently recently, because I feel like the judgment piece is the piece that feels particularly like human in this decision. The AI might be able to help with diagnosis or differential. Arguably, they may eventually be able to do true reasoning. I don't think we're actually seeing true reasoning just yet. But it's really the judgment piece, that I'm going to look at your scraped knee and I'm going to make a judgment call that, based on my experience and your history and your exam and whatever, and a photo of your scraped knee yesterday, that I do not think this is a septic knee. And therefore, I think you need ice and some Motrin and some physical therapy and a Band-Aid, not, an X-ray and an MRI and admission to the hospital with IV antibiotics. That is the judgment call that I think is going to stay with humans for a long time. I think. I don't know. I don't actually know.
I think as well, in this space, there is so much focus on sort of clinical medicine, the doctor patient sort of engagement, the information exchange between people getting a diagnosis or a therapy. but actually these tools can sit across the spectrum of that journey,
Sure.
meaning where there are lower stakes and still useful applications in operational areas, and rostering and finding a way around the hospital. There are multiple lower stakes applications
Yeah.
that institutions can perhaps deploy a lot more rapidly to learn from, while some of these more higher stakes, value, ethical challenges are getting worked through, perhaps in a more slower and careful kind of manner. What would you say to leaders in healthcare who are coming into the AI space, and perhaps maybe they're sitting on one end of the spectrum? One is, it's the best thing since sliced bread, let's ram it into everything, and the other is, it's a parlor trick. What would you say for AI leaders healthcare leaders to better understand the landscape?
Yeah, I think my main recommendation to people is just to use these tools and give them a try and kick the tires. And the more I use them, the more I have a much deeper understanding of where they work and where they fail and how they fail and why they fail, and why they fail as well. So typically, I think if someone thinks AI is the best thing since sliced bread and another person thinks it's going to ruin the world, I would imagine that those people actually don't use AI that generative AI specifically. They probably don't use it that often because um, if you're using it frequently, and I use it every single day, I have a very clear understanding that uh, I don't know that I ever trust anything implicitly, that I would just like read it and accept it, and then accept it enough to say it's coming from me. Like even if sometimes I'll say, "Hey, try to respond as me," and because I'm kind of curious how well it'll do. But I always read that, and I always find things. It's like, yeah, that's not exactly right, or that's not. I see why it said that, but I know that I cannot trust it in completely. And so I would argue that people need to use it more, and then that's how you get to where I am at, which is like, yeah, it's pretty darn good. There's some really incredible opportunities here, but then you'll also be like, but yesterday it totally screwed this thing up.
Hmm. Yeah, it's that jagged frontier of the
Yep.
things that it can do really well, and other things it's so it finds challenging, and it isn't always clear what
No.
things it will struggle with too, until you do it and then iterate, and then it says, "Oh yes, of course I did that wrong," and you're like, "What
Yeah,
happened there?"
and that's what the research shows too. You would think that maybe it would be fine at because it's really good at nephrology. Well, it's probably good at cardiology too, and that's not necessarily the case. The big gaps that I've seen in the research are pediatrics and anesthesia. Typically, probably less research papers written in those spaces that are of a clinical nature, and so it's way more likely to make mistakes in particular domains or fields that you wouldn't implicitly think, oh, it probably is not going to understand this particular field of medicine or of science or engineering, whatever it is.
Well, this has been a fantastic conversation, Dr. Graham Walker. You not only are an expert in these areas, but a prolific, I guess, entrepreneur in developing MedCalc, which was used in New Zealand and globally, and I think 70% of physicians in the US use it. So
Yeah.
a wildly powerful and useful tool.
Thanks.
And your new company, Offcore. Did you want to tell me a little bit about that before we close up?
Yeah, sure. We're trying to build the world's first and best data set around physician work and workload. So that it's not just how many dollars and cents somebody makes, but it's how many patients they're expected to see per hour, how many hours are they actually working per day, how many hours of pajama time are they putting in, so that physicians can have a better sense and a better sense of transparency about if they're getting paid fairly, if they're getting appropriate amount of vacation and time off, and just comparing apples to apples, which often is really hard to do in healthcare, and so we're making it happen.
That's awesome, Graham. Well, everyone should follow Graham Walker on LinkedIn. He's amazing. And yeah, thanks so much for your time today.
Been a pleasure. Thanks for having me.